Every day, we see the darker side of the world around us. We witness how people can hurt others in ways that are hard to understand. It's a sad part of life, but it's something we can't ignore. As someone who dives into the world of crime, I'm here to share the most shocking stories and try to understand what drives people to do such things. I'm Michael, and today, I've got another unreal true crime story for you. On a quiet Thursday night, May 19th, 1983, Diane Downs, a 27-year-old mother, drove along Old Mohawk Road near Springfield, Oregon. Her children, Christie, 8, Cheryl, 7, and Danny, 3, were seated in the back of her bright red car. Diane navigated the dark, empty road confidently. Driving at night on secluded roads was nothing new to her, and she felt at ease, expecting to reach home soon. But that night took a tragic turn. A shadowy figure appeared on the roadside, a man with disheveled hair. Diane stopped her car and stepped out, curious or perhaps cautious. As she approached, the man suddenly revealed a gun, demanding her car keys. When she refused, the situation escalated quickly. He moved toward the vehicle and fired shots into the car, injuring the children inside. Diane's instincts kicked in. She pretended to throw the keys, attempting to distract him, but in the chaos, he shot her in the arm before she managed to jump back into the driver's seat. Ignoring her own pain, Diane sped to the nearest hospital, shouting for help as she arrived. "Somebody shot my kids!" Medical staff rushed to the scene, pulling her bloodied children from the car. 2 were found in the back seat, but Cheryl, the middle child, was lying motionless on the front floorboard. Despite desperate efforts by nurses and surgeons, it was too late for Cheryl. Christie and Danny, however, clung to life. As Diane wrapped her injured arm with a beach towel, she remained calm enough to make phone calls to her ex-partner and her parents while waiting for updates. When the news of Cheryl's death came, she appeared shaken but held it together. Meanwhile, police began investigating the mysterious gunman who had shattered this small community's sense of safety. But suspicion soon turned to Diane herself. Her story had inconsistencies, and investigators noticed something unsettling about her demeanor. Diane's past gave detectives even more reason to question her version of events. Born in 1955, Diane was the eldest of 5 siblings in a strict, religious household. The family moved frequently, eventually settling in Phoenix, Arizona, where her father found stable work at the post office. The family adhered to conservative values, leaving little room for emotional warmth or leniency. Diane, yearning for attention, rebelled in her teenage years. She dyed her hair blonde, wore makeup, and began going by her middle name, leaving behind her reserved upbringing. Her newfound confidence caught the eye of her peers, especially Steve Downs, a fellow student at Moon Valley High School. The two became inseparable, despite her parents' disapproval. After high school, Diane briefly attended Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College in California, where she was expelled for multiple affairs. By then, her relationship with Steve had faltered, but the two reunited after Diane moved back to Arizona. Defying her parents, she married Steve on November 13, 1973, at just 18. The couple's marriage was tumultuous from the start, marred by Diane's infidelity and Steve's mistrust. Their first child, Christie, was born in 1974, but Diane soon left to join the Navy. Her stint in the military lasted only 3 weeks, with Diane citing medical issues and concerns about Steve's parenting as reasons for her return. Their relationship continued to unravel, setting the stage for a troubled future. Steve Downs was constantly on edge, haunted by the fear that Diane would betray him again. Their marriage, once full of youthful passion, had devolved into public and private confrontations. At one point during their troubled relationship, Steve purchased a gun, and Diane gifted him both a rifle and a revolver for Christmas. Steve, in turn, taught Diane how to handle all three firearms. Their second child, Cheryl, was born on January 10, 1976. Concerned about finances, Steve decided to get a vasectomy, believing their family of 4 was as large as they could responsibly manage. However, Diane later became pregnant again, which led to an abortion she later claimed to regret. Their marriage continued to crumble as Diane's affairs persisted. On December 29, 1979, Diane gave birth to a son, Danny, but Steve knew he wasn't the father. Despite this, their official divorce didn't occur until 1980. Diane often claimed to love her children, but her behavior told a different story. Christie, Cheryl, and Danny were frequently seen wearing old clothes and sporting unkempt hair. She was known to yell at them and deny them the affection they desperately needed. Steve observed that Diane's neglect mirrored the emotional coldness she had experienced from her own parents. Diane's parenting often left much to be desired. When she couldn't find a babysitter, she put 6-year-old Christie in charge of her siblings, a responsibility far too heavy for a child that young. After her divorce, Diane struggled to make ends meet, even with her job at the Postal Service. She turned to surrogacy as a way to earn extra income, undergoing psychiatric evaluations twice in the process. Although the tests revealed signs of psychosis and poor judgment, Diane was still approved as a surrogate and earned $10,000 after giving birth to a baby girl in 1982. Encouraged by this success, she dreamed of opening her own surrogacy clinic and even considered attending medical school to make it happen. In 1981, Diane met Robert, a married co-worker. Robert was already navigating a strained marriage, and Diane's bold, provocative demeanor soon caught his attention. Their workplace acquaintance quickly turned into an affair. While Robert viewed their relationship as purely physical, Diane became fixated on him, envisioning a future together. Robert made it clear he had no interest in being a stepfather to Diane's children, insisting he didn't even want to see them. Meanwhile, Steve briefly re-entered Diane's life, hoping to reconcile their marriage. This led to heated arguments and, on at least one occasion, a physical altercation that left Diane visibly bruised. Despite the chaos, Diane continued to pursue Robert, even going so far as to get his name tattooed on her shoulder alongside a rose. By late 1982, Diane's life had become increasingly unstable. She accused Robert of giving her a sexually transmitted infection, which led to a final breakup and a confession from Robert to his wife. Diane's surrogate plans hit a snag when she was turned away from a clinic due to her sexually transmitted infection, but she eventually returned to Kentucky for another attempt. Around this time, Diane's mobile home mysteriously caught fire while she was away. She collected $7,000 in insurance money and used it, along with her first surrogacy payment, to open an unlicensed surrogacy clinic. Predictably, the venture failed. Despite these setbacks, Diane continued to fantasize about a future with Robert. In February 1983, Robert drunkenly proposed, leading Diane to write in her diary, "I could hardly believe my ears today. Robert said he'd live in the same house with my kids and me." That same month in Robert's apartment, Diane pressured him to choose between her and his wife. Robert chose his wife, sparking Diane's anger. He left the apartment, calling his wife from a phone booth. She picked him up and they returned to their home, but Diane wasn't done. She followed them, pounding on their door and ringing their phone throughout the night. Sometime after, Diane revealed she'd secured a job transfer and would be moving to Oregon in April, taking her children with her. Then, one day, Robert and Diane crossed paths at work once again. Despite everything, they resumed their affair. Diane, with only weeks left before her move, stayed with Robert temporarily. He even got a rose tattoo to match hers, though his excluded her name. By April, Diane left Arizona for Oregon and Robert returned to his wife. But her obsession didn't stop there. She bombarded Robert's house with letters and packages, all of which Robert returned unopened. Meanwhile, Diane's ex-husband, Steve, discovered his firearms, 3 in total, were missing. He suspected Diane had taken them but didn't think much of it, reasoning she needed protection as a single mother in a new state. In May 1983, Diane decided to visit Heather, her co-worker, with her children, thinking it would be a good outing. On their way home, Diane claimed she stopped when she saw a man signaling for help. She said she stepped out of the car and he demanded her keys. When she refused, gunshots rang out. She rushed to the hospital with her injured children. Initially, Cheryl went unnoticed until Diane called out that her daughter was on the floor and hadn't moved. Medical staff found Cheryl lifeless, with 2 gunshot wounds in her back. Efforts to revive her failed. She had been dead on arrival. Cheryl was just 7 years old. Christie was critically injured, having suffered a stroke and massive internal damage. A bullet remained lodged in her body while another had torn through her chest, collapsing her right lung and causing a hemorrhage in her left. Her heart stopped during surgery, but doctors managed to restart it and stabilize her enough for later procedures. Danny, awake but terrified, had a bullet wound near his spine. He struggled to breathe, requiring chest tubes for assistance. Doctors feared he might never walk again. While her children fought for their lives, Diane's behavior raised eyebrows. Hospital receptionist Judy Patterson noticed Diane's injuries were superficial compared to her children's life-threatening wounds. Diane casually washed her arm in the restroom before calling her parents, and oddly, Robert. When speaking with her mother, Diane described the events leading to the shooting, claiming her kids had been laughing and talking when a man stopped her to demand her keys. But later, to police, she said her children were asleep at the time. The police arrived to investigate and offered to take Diane to the crime scene. As they passed Diane's car, she asked, "I hope my car's okay. Does it have any bullet holes in it?" Diane led the authorities to the scene of the crime, recalling vague details, including what she described as an icky yellow car that supposedly belonged to the attacker. However, no such vehicle was found. As Diane began complaining about the pain in her arm, the police officer called for another officer to take her and her father back to the hospital, while he stayed behind to continue searching for evidence. Upon returning to the hospital, Diane was informed of Cheryl's death and the critical condition of Christie and Danny. Her reaction was unsettling. When told Danny might survive, she remarked, "Do you mean the bullet missed his heart?" "Whew!" A response that baffled hospital staff and law enforcement alike. The detectives pulled Diane aside for questioning. Both noted her calm demeanor, which seemed unnervingly rational for someone who had just experienced a violent attack on her children. They recognized the wound on Diane's arm as consistent with cases where a perpetrator inflicted a self-inflicted injury to divert suspicion. Diane described the attacker as a white male in his late 20s, with dark wavy hair, a stubbly beard, wearing a Levi's jacket and an off-color t-shirt. She also agreed to let investigators search her home, where she claimed to own 2 guns. When Diane was finally allowed to see Christie, the investigators observed a striking reaction from the little girl. Her heart rate spiked from 104 to 147 beats per minute when Diane took her hand and repeatedly said, "I love you." Christie appeared terrified. A search of Diane's home turned up her guns, calendars, and a diary filled with obsessive letters to Robert. Diane's account of the attack changed slightly each time she retold it, with details such as whether the children were awake or asleep, and her reaction to the shooter varying. Meanwhile, Steve Downs, Diane's ex-husband, flew to Oregon upon learning of the attack. Despite Danny not being his biological child, he expressed concern for all three children. When investigators asked Steve about Diane's calls on the night of the shooting, he revealed she had contacted Robert. The detectives traveled to Arizona to interview Robert, who, with his wife present, provided details about his affair with Diane. Both Robert and Steve had alibis, ruling them out as suspects. A forensic scientist analyzed the bullets and gunpowder residue in Diane's car. The lack of external damage indicated all 5 bullets struck their targets. Blood and gunpowder were found in the back seat and front passenger seat, but none in the driver's seat, pointing to Diane's likely involvement. Cheryl's funeral took place on May 25th, and her ashes were scattered in Arizona. Christie and Danny were stabilized, though their injuries were severe. Danny was paralyzed from the waist down, while Christie, who had suffered a stroke, lost much of her speech but showed signs of improvement with therapy. As the investigation progressed, Diane grew increasingly defensive. She volunteered for another interview, claiming she knew the shooter and that he knew her. However, her answers were vague and repetitive, filled with, "I don't know." When asked directly if she had committed the crime, she became angry and stormed out. The most damning evidence against Diane came from her daughter, Christie. Her eventual testimony would provide the crucial details needed to unravel the truth behind what had happened on that fateful night. Christie opened up about the abuse she and her siblings had endured, revealing that Diane had hit them on multiple occasions. Christie also began to recall the traumatic events of the night of the shooting, though, at first, she couldn't bring herself to name the shooter. The psychologist encouraged Christie to write the name of the person responsible on a piece of paper and then burn it, offering a symbolic release of her pain. One day, Christie handed the paper to Paula before burning it. Written on it were the words, "My mom." Christie eventually shared the full story. Diane had stopped the car on a dark road, retrieved a handgun from the trunk, and shot her children at close range before shooting herself in the arm to stage the crime. On February 28, 1984, Diane was arrested at her workplace and charged with first-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and criminal assault. Adding to the drama, Diane was pregnant at the time. Initially, she sought the services of celebrity lawyer Melvin Belli, but he was unavailable. Instead, defense attorney Jim Jagger took her case. Jagger was charismatic and skilled, often charming jurors before proceedings began, while the prosecutor prepared for what he initially thought would be a straightforward case. He was wrong. Diane garnered surprising public sympathy early on. The prosecutor, known for his professionalism and rigid demeanor, faced an uphill battle against the public's perception. Diane played into this by displaying bold theatrics in court, once writing "lie" on a notepad and holding it up as the prosecutor delivered his opening statement. Jagger quickly snatched it from her hands. The prosecutor argued that Diane had planned the murders to remove her children as obstacles to a future with Robert. A psychiatrist testified that Diane exhibited traits of antisocial behavior, narcissism, and potentially psychopathy. Throughout the trial, Diane's demeanor remained consistent, calm, detached, and at times disturbingly jovial. She was often seen laughing with Jagger, further unsettling onlookers. Diane revealed a previously untold part of her life during her testimony. She claimed her father had sexually abused her when she was 12, taking her to isolated places and entering her room at night. While Diane spoke about these incidents in detail, her father vehemently denied the allegations. Diane's mother testified that Diane had been emotional on the night of the shooting, contradicting the testimonies of doctors and nurses who described her as composed and indifferent. One of the most memorable moments of the trial came when the prosecution played the song Diane claimed was playing during the shooting. To the shock of everyone in the courtroom, Diane hummed along, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation. The most powerful testimony came from Christie herself. Despite her young age and lingering trauma, Christie summoned immense courage to take the stand. She trembled and cried, often losing composure whenever Diane made eye contact with her. Yet, she managed to tell the court that her mother had shot her and her siblings before inflicting a superficial wound on herself. Jagger attempted to discredit Christie's testimony, suggesting she had been coached, but Christie stood firm. During the trial, Diane gave birth to a baby girl. In a television interview, she remarked, "You can't replace children, but you can replace the effect they give you. They give me love, satisfaction, stability, and a reason to live." This statement only fueled public outrage. On June 17, 1984, Diane was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years, with a minimum of 25 years before parole eligibility. Steve Downs, deemed unfit as a guardian, lost custody of Christie and Danny. In 1986, the prosecutor and his wife adopted the two children, providing them with a stable and loving home to recover from the horrors inflicted by Diane. In 1989, Diane escaped from the Oregon Women's Correctional Center, evading capture for 10 days. A massive manhunt involving 14 states ended when she was found hiding in the home of a fellow inmate. The courts added 5 years to her sentence. Following her recapture, Diane was interviewed on The Oprah Winfrey Show. The interview was a chaotic display of Diane's personality. She deflected direct questions with long, convoluted answers, made sarcastic comments, and even cracked inappropriate jokes. Diane, labeled a dangerous offender by the state of Oregon, became eligible for parole hearings every 2 years after serving her initial 25 years. At her first hearing in 2008, she maintained her innocence, doubling down on her original story. The district attorney countered her claims by highlighting her inconsistencies and refusal to take responsibility. Diane's hearings in 2010 and 2020 were similarly denied. Despite overwhelming evidence, Diane retains a small but vocal group of defenders. Her father publicly supported her until his death in 2017, even offering $100,000 to anyone who could provide evidence proving her innocence. Diane's brother runs a Facebook group, Free Diane Downs. Diane's supporters often point to James Clare Haynes, a local man who allegedly boasted about shooting Diane and her children. Affidavits from acquaintances claim Haynes admitted to the crime, but these claims are considered hearsay in court. While Haynes had a criminal record and a history of violence, no physical evidence links him to the shootings. Christie and Danny, now adults, have largely kept their lives private, occasionally speaking about their mother in public. Christie named her daughter after her late sister Cheryl, honoring her memory. Diane's youngest child, born shortly before her sentencing, was adopted and named Rebecca, or Becky. As an adult, Becky opened up about learning the truth of her origins. Though she always knew she was adopted, it wasn't until she tricked a babysitter into revealing information that she began piecing together. The revelation pushed Becky into a downward spiral. She struggled with substance abuse, dropped out of high school, and rebelled against her adoptive family. At 21, feeling lost, she reached out to Diane for the first time. While their initial exchanges were positive, Diane's obsessive and paranoid nature soon emerged. She claimed Becky was being watched as part of a conspiracy and eventually accused her of complicity. Becky severed all contact, later expressing deep regret for ever reaching out. Today, Becky has rebuilt her life. She married, started a family, and overcame personal struggles, including a battle with lupus. She now runs a non-profit dog breeding business, finding fulfillment in her work and family. As of 2024, Diane Downs is serving her sentence at the Central California Women's Facility. At 69 years old, she remains one of the most infamous figures in true crime, and it is unlikely, thankfully, that she will ever be released. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.